A guy named Calvin lives in a foster home with his pals Murph and Reg. They're into basketball and often play in the yard. One day while they're playing, bullies led by a guy named Ox interrupt them. Ox challenges Calvin to a game for his jersey. Though his friends suggest ignoring it, Calvin's determined to take it on like his favorite players would. They play, and Ox wins easily due to his height advantage. He takes Calvin's jersey and tears it up to annoy him. The orphanage director, Stan, often has the kids sell candy to raise money. That night, they sell candy at an NBA game. Calvin sees the coach leaving and offers him candy. When the coach learns it's for charity, he offers Calvin money. But Calvin hesitates, unsure if it'll really go to charity. Impressed by the kid's truthfulness, Wagger gives him 4 passes to the next basketball game. Calvin, thrilled, rushes to Murph to share the news. The next day, some couples visit the orphanage hoping to adopt a child. Calvin is optimistic at first, but soon realizes they only want younger kids. Later, they receive a box of used clothes from the thrift store. Calvin grabs a pair of shoes and tries them on. When he asks the nun about them, she reveals they belonged to a famous basketball player. Calvin discovers Michael B. Jordan's initials on them. Ox becomes envious and snatches the shoes, tossing them in the air, leaving Calvin disappointed. The shoes end up hanging on a power cable. During a thunderstorm that night, Calvin wakes up Murph and Reg to retrieve the shoes. Despite the heavy rain, they go outside. Calvin climbs a tree near the cable, attempting to reach the shoes when lightning strikes. Calvin falls with the shoes but thankfully isn't seriously hurt. He notices a strange energy in the shoes but doesn't dwell on it. The next day, they head to the arena to sell candies. True to the coach's word, Calvin, Murph, and Reg get 4 tickets. Ox and his friends see them and grow jealous. They threaten to report them to Biddleman, claiming they used charity money to buy the tickets. Calvin offers Ox one of the tickets to defuse the situation. The group of friends watches the game between the Knights and the Minnesota Timberwolves. During halftime, Tracy Reynolds, the star player, and a coach do a show to attract more fans. They pick someone from the crowd to play against Tracy, and it's Calvin's lucky day. Ox tries to grab Calvin's ticket when he finds out, but Calvin outsmarts him and dashes to the front. Tracy doesn't worry much since Calvin's just a kid. He lets Calvin score first to hype up the crowd, but then he has to step up his game or be embarrassed. Despite Tracy's efforts, Calvin pulls off a slam dunk, stunning the crowd and embarrassing Tracy. The next day, the Knights coaches ask Biddleman to let Calvin play with them for a day. Biddleman hesitates, but agrees when money is offered. Calvin's friends are thrilled, but Ox is mad because Calvin couldn't beat him before getting the special shoes. The kids think the shoes are magical and decide to keep it hush-hush, but Ox overhears their conversation. The next day, Calvin barges into the Knights' locker room, irritating Tracy. His teammates warn Tracy to brace himself because Calvin's aiming for his spot. They hand Calvin a team jersey and new kicks he must wear. He asks if he can stick with his old shoes, but the coach shrugs it off. Calvin's just a PR move. How he plays doesn't matter. Since his last game, Calvin's become super popular, packing the arena. He sits out the first half. When it looks like they'll lose, he pleads with the coach for a shot. Despite doubts, the coach agrees, noting Calvin's not wearing his lucky shoes. Calvin's a nervous wreck, irritating everyone. He calls a timeout, swaps his shoes, and returns more confident. He helps the team catch up and snatch victory. After the game, he signs on for the rest of the tournament. While packing at the orphanage, Biddleman tries to sway him, wanting to stay his guardian for the cash perks. He warns Calvin about folks looking to adopt him for his money. During the flight, the coach puts Tracy and Calvin in the same room. Calvin is thrilled because he admires Tracy, but Tracy isn't so keen. Tracy plans to break the curfew to go on a date, so he shows Calvin how to order room service before leaving. Calvin enjoys eating wherever he wants and makes a mess in the room. When he returns with his date, the place is a disaster with food everywhere. Instead of spending time with his date, Calvin ends up being taken care of because he's sick. Tracy struggles to sleep due to Calvin's snoring. The next day, Tracy feels tired for their important match. Calvin accidentally spills the beans to the coach about staying up late. The coach warns Tracy of suspension if he breaks curfew again. However, Calvin shines during the games and helps win them all. Opponents are surprised by Calvin's skills on the court. He attends press conferences and earns a lot of money. With his earnings, he buys gifts for everyone at the orphanage. Calvin even wins the NBA slam dunk competition, becoming a rising basketball star. One evening, Calvin chats with Murph about his exciting experiences in the NBA. Ox, feeling envious, attacks Calvin, aiming to snatch his shoes. Their scuffle halts when Biddleman steps in, scolding Ox for hitting his pals, mindful of Calvin's newfound wealth. Later, at a hotel, Tracy heads to the pharmacy for sleeping pills and allergy meds to ensure a good night's sleep before the upcoming game. Calvin tags along, much to Tracy's irritation. On the way, Calvin asks about Tracy's folks. Discovering Tracy has a strained relationship with his dad surprises Calvin, who values his own parents deeply. Tracy deflects, preferring not to discuss family matters, and continues driving. Inattentive, he mistakenly takes a sleeping pill instead of an allergy one from the cashier. As a result, the guy dozes off before he can even get the car going back to the hotel. Calvin realizes if he's late, Tracy will be in trouble, so he drives back, bumping into a few things along the way. The next day, Calvin gets suspended for joyriding. Tracy feels guilty for Calvin getting punished because of his mistake. Later, on the flight home, Tracy thanks Calvin for taking the blame. Tracy's starting to like Calvin after spending time with him. Back at the orphanage, lots of folks want to adopt Calvin. Murph feels left out because he wants attention too. Biddleman, not wanting Calvin to leave, sets up meetings with the worst potential parents to sabotage his chances. Calvin dislikes grown-ups he meets and opts to keep hanging out at the orphanage. One weekend, he pops up at Tracy's place without warning and is amazed by the enormity of the player's mansion. Calvin spills his worries to Tracy about Murph being upset, his lack of good parents, and an upcoming geometry test. To sort things out, Tracy suggests inviting Murph over. While waiting, they make geometry fun to keep Calvin engaged, and they end up goofing around with paint. Murph joins in later, forgetting his tiff with Calvin. The next day, Calvin and pals chat about the struggle of finding decent parents. They think Calvin should mend Tracy's relationship with his dad, so Calvin meets Tracy's father and brings him over, but the player flips out over the invasion of privacy. Despite the dust-up, the Knights have a big game against the Toronto Raptors, but Calvin and Tracy's spat isn't resolved yet. Because of this, they end up losing the game. The coach gives the team a talking to for messing up in such an important match. Now, they've got just one more game left, and it's make or break win it, and they're in the playoffs. The next day, a couple shows up at the orphanage, wanting to adopt Calvin. He's doubtful after a string of letdowns, but Biddleman encourages him to give them a chance. He dresses Calvin up in new shoes, figuring if he looks sharp, they might be more inclined to take him in. Before he leaves, Calvin entrusts his lucky shoes to Murph, telling him to protect them with his life. Murph tries them on to see if they work for him, but he can't pull off Calvin's moves. He figures they're not a good fit and continues talking to a picture of his mom. Ox and his buddies pressure him to spill the beans about the shoes. When he refuses, they drag him to Biddleman, who burns the only picture Murph has of his mom. With no other choice, Murph spills the beans about the shoes' whereabouts. After that, Biddleman meets up with his pals and bets $100,000 against the Knights in the upcoming game. He's thinking that Calvin will be really bad at the game because he's hidden the lucky shoes. Calvin's out for dinner with some people who might become his new parents, but he doesn't feel like he fits in. Meanwhile, Tracy meets his dad and they make up. He's really missing Calvin and chats with him before their next game. He wants to adopt him, but he doesn't say anything yet because he met the couple who might adopt Calvin yesterday. Just before the game, Murph phones Calvin and spills the beans about the shoes. Calvin hurries back to the orphanage to get them. The other kids help him capture Biddleman and make him spill about where he's hidden the shoes. The Ox decides to go against the crowd and lend a hand to Calvin, but then changes his mind when Biddleman insults him as usual. He takes out the shoes from the safe and returns them to Calvin. Then everyone hops on their scooters and heads back to the arena. Biddleman manages to free himself somehow and calls his friend to prevent Calvin from making it to the game. The guys try to stop him, but the kids delay them, allowing Calvin to sneak into the arena. As a last-ditch effort, Biddleman blocks Calvin's path. However, Calvin hits him with his scooter, clearing the way to the game. When he arrives, his team is way behind. Yet once he starts playing, they quickly catch up. Unfortunately, he gets tackled during the game, wrecking his shoes in the process. Calvin, feeling anxious, thinks his magic only works with special shoes, believing he can't play well without them. Tracy encourages him, saying the shoes just boost his confidence. His real skill comes from within. Eventually, Calvin joins the game again, helping his team win. Wanting a normal childhood, he tells his coach he won't renew the contract and returns to the orphanage, now changed without Biddleman. Tracy talks to Calvin about adopting a child and asks if he wants to be his son, as long as Murph can come too. Their buddy Reg gets adopted by another family. In the end, Calvin and Murph playfully wrestle with Tracy in their new room. Turn on alerts, like, and subscribe for more videos similar to this one. Thank you for watching.